Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. For today's episode, another in my series of milestone moments. These are moments in a band's career where everything kind of comes together and it leads to one of their biggest selling albums. So the album that we have picked for today is Rush's 1981 masterpiece, Moving Pictures. And for an album this important, I had to bring in a special guest. So joining me today is C.Kay. He is a hardcore Rush fan. He has seen Rush 125 times live. That is 124 times more than I have. He's also a longtime follower of my YouTube channel. He's been there right from the beginning. He always has great comments. So this was a lot of fun to meet him face to face across the internet like this and to have him on the show. So, all right, Rush, Moving Pictures, 1981, Neil Peart, rest in peace, Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson. This is coming off of Permanent Waves, where the band is just moves strength to strength. And then it, in a lot of ways, all kind of comes together here on Moving Pictures. Terry Brown, their kind of longtime producer. So C.Kay, tell us, what is your experiences with this amazing album, Moving Pictures? What's your history with it?
Well, first I thought I'd tell a little bit of my origin story of how I came to this record. I was about 13 in 1981. And, prior to Rush, I was like I was really into these Styx records like Cornerstone,
Yeah,
and Pieces of Eight,
yeah.
and Grand Illusion. I was really into Styx. Then I was super into Jay Giles, of all things. Love Stinks, was really into that record. I wanted to see Jay Giles so bad. Then I discovered the Kinks, One for the Road, still my favorite live album of all time. So it's kind of like a Styx, Giles, and Kinks were the beginning. Rush, all I knew was everybody walked around and had these Man and Star shirts, but I'd never heard them on the radio. Back then, there was no internet. It's 1981. FM radio I was plugged into radio. I was always listening to the radio and trying to discover new bands. And one night, I heard Limelight on the radio. I didn't know it at the time, but I heard the solo to the Ride Out, the drums crashed at the end. I'd never heard drums like that before. And when the song ended, they said, "That's Rush, Limelight." And I was on a mission at that point. I'm like, I got to find out about this band Rush. I always saw people walking around with the logo. I was familiar with the logo, but I'd never heard them. Rush were never on the radio, at least where I lived, until Moving Pictures. So in seventh grade, we had an activity at the end of the day where you could choose your activity. And mine was listening to rock. So you would go into a room for an hour and there were turntables all set up. I mean, I can't believe this actually went on.
You went to a pretty cool school.
Yeah. Looking back on it now, it's pretty mind-blowing. And you would bring in your records and people would play records. Now thinking about it now, what chaos, because you have all these turntables going with the built-in speakers and everybody's playing different records. So I'm in the class and I see this record floating around and I'm like, that's Rush. So I go up to the kid, his name was John Ritchie, and I said, "Does that have Limelight on it?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I go, "Can I take that home tonight and tape it and I'll bring it back to you tomorrow?" And he said, "Yeah." So that night on my parents' stereo, I played it in the living room and I bootlegged it with a cassette recorder. Record play, put a cassette, Radio Shack, tiny little tape recorder up to the stereo, taped Moving Pictures. Didn't really listen to it, didn't even really look at it. Next day I'm on the bus and I'm looking at the record, right? And this is where I kind of have my Beatles moment. I didn't grow up in the Beatles generation. I can't relate to the whole Ed Sullivan show, but this was my Beatles moment. I'm on the bus and I'm ready to return this record to this kid. And I'm looking at these pictures and there's two guys with short hair. So I immediately dismiss them. They're not rock stars. Then I see this guy right here, Geddy Lee. He looks like a witch. I had never seen anybody in my life that looked like that. Still haven't to this day. I'm looking at him and I'm reading the credits and it says Geddy Lee. I was saying Jetty. I didn't even know how to pronounce his name. I thought his name was Geddy Lee. And I'm looking at the credits and it's got all these synthesizers and stuff. I don't even know what they are. And then it said vocals. And I'm like, that's the guy? when I heard the vocals, I thought maybe it was a chick. I had no idea, you know? So my mind is blown. I bring this record back to this kid. I give it back to him. And now I have it on cassette. I got it bootlegged. And I start listening to it, fall in love with it. Styx, the Kinks, and J. Geils, they were all history at that point. I had found a totally new level of rock. And then from that point on, it was a year till they came to my town. I got into them in May of that year, and they had just played. There was a Memorial Day cookout on my street, and I had just talked to this kid, older kid, 21 years old, Jimmy Lee. And he goes, "Yeah, I just saw Rush." And I'm like, "You saw Rush?" And he's like, "Yeah, I saw him in Providence last weekend." Now I'm 13 years old. All I do is ride a bike. Providence might as well be Paris. I don't even know where that is. Turns out it's only 30 minutes from my house, but I don't know this at the time. I had never left my town. I'm just on a bike, you know? And I'm like, this kid saw Rush. So he takes me into his room. He's got this huge poster with their heads on a poster from Farewell to Kings. He gives me Farewell to Kings on 8-track. He goes, "Borrow this." I taped it in my parents' car. I played it on the car and then bootleg that one. I had a paper route in the morning, so I start going to the typical story of going to the record store, seeing what's in the bins. My first one I bought was 2112. My next one was All the World's a Stage. Back then, unless you saw a magazine, you didn't even know what they looked like. And when I found All the World's a Stage, this triple gatefold, and saw the pictures, I would just sit and listen to this album over and over and over again and look at these pictures and dream of what it was like to see them. So then within that year, they released Signals in September of 82. I'm there on street date. I buy it. Within a month, they announced the tickets to my area. I buy them. I see them in concert. First concert I ever saw. The rest is history. 125 shows later from 1982 to 2015. They were my band. Now I've gotten into so many other bands over the years and I don't even listen to Rush anymore. I burnt it out so much when I heard it, but you know, they kind of brought me to a new level, opened me up to metal, opened me up to prog, got me into so many, you know, kind of widened my musical vocabulary, so to speak. But they'll always be my favorite band, and Geddy Lee will always be my kind of rock god, you know.
That's awesome, man. That's a great.
And that's kind of my origin story. I hope I hit on all the points that I intended to hit. Neil once said that moving pictures is where they became themselves. He doesn't really count any of the records before that. He said moving pictures is really the start of when Rush became Rush. Now, I don't know if I agree with that, but to him, moving pictures is where they became Rush.
I think it's, you know, and I've heard him say similar things about this album where he said and this started, in my opinion, on Permanent Waves, where they started, as much as I love when they go nuts and play long songs and everything like that, I think on Permanent Waves, they were starting to consciously try to trim out the fat a little bit. And I've heard Neil say that they started to realize like they didn't need to repeat a section 20 times. They could repeat it 5 times and it would be just as effective. And they started learning how to get their point across in a more focused, concise nature, you know, whereas before they said they felt like they needed to do crazy rhythmic things. And then they realized like, okay, we can get the same effect by toning it down a little bit. And I think they start moving towards that on Permanent Waves, and on Moving Pictures, it really sort of crystallizes and you're sort of getting the best of all worlds here. You're getting the proggy type stuff, like a song like Tom Sawyer, as radio friendly, quote, as that song is. There's still there's some odd meter stuff in it. There's some weird shifts and riffs and stuff going on. Look at YYZ. I mean, YYZ is a tour de force. Everybody in the band showing off their musical prowess in that song, but it's still a song that gets played on the radio. It still has a strong melodic element to it. And to me, on Moving Pictures is when they really sort of were able to hone in on that and still have the really interesting musical things going on, but it was still really melodic The album is super well produced. It sounds fantastic. You can crank it up. It's got all kinds of low end and the nice stereo separation and stuff going on in it. And for me, it's just everything kind of coming together. Even Neil's lyrics. I love Neil's lyrics across all the albums, but on here, he makes it a little more relatable for the common man. You know, a song like Red Barchetta is real fireside storytelling. Uh, Tom Sawyer the same way. He sort of distills it down to like a common man type of thing. So it's just the whole record. It feels like they've been moving towards this. Their career has been moving up to this point, and it all just sort of comes together. The melodies, the lyrics, the playing, the production, the album cover is iconic. You know, just everything about the record just sort of hits the mark.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, it's their best sounding record. It's their best songs. It's their best artwork. Just like you said, everything. It's amazing to think it was their eighth record, but it's also amazing to think that they're only 27 years old when they recorded this. I mean, if
That's
you
right.
really get crazy and think that they did 2112 when they were 22, I mean, it's
Right.
nuts to think about that they were 27 when they made this
Yeah.
record. I mean, that's just
I,
mind blowing.
I had a weird, for some reason, so I started getting into music in 80, towards the end of 1980. And I'm assuming that I was hearing, Limelight or Tom Sawyer on the radio, but for some reason, I think it was because I was part of a record club where, you got to pick how you got so many free records or whatever.
Yeah, I was in one
And
of
for
them.
some reason, my first two Rush records were 2112 and All the World's a Stage. So I didn't get Moving Pictures till three or four Rush albums in. I sort of, maybe that's all they had, or I don't know why I started with those. You would have thought, hearing Moving Pictures, that I would have gone out and gotten that one right away. And yeah, I just remember being, floored by it. It was the keyboards in it at this point are it's the perfect balance of keyboards for me in Rush. From this point on, from Signals and on, the keyboards for me become too much. They start stepping on Alex Lifeson a little bit more than I would like. But on Moving Pictures, you still have a lot of songs driven by guitar riffs. Limelight starts with a guitar riff. Even though Tom Sawyer has this sort of a keyboard sound in the beginning, it's still very guitar, bum, 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 bum. There's still big guitar power chords in it in some ways. And I mean, we'll get into this when we go through each track on the record. Side two of this album, especially Camera Eye and Witch Hunt, foreshadow for me where Rush would go with Signals and On. Those, and we'll get into it when we get into those songs. But for me, it's sort of like side one. I always feel a certain way about side one of this record, and side two for me feels like them starting to move in the direction that they will go with Signals and Grace Under Pressure. So, all right, so maybe we can get started on jump into the songs on the album. So it starts with probably Rush's, it has to be Rush's most identifiable, their most popular song, Tom Sawyer. Maybe it's a song I've kind of heard too many times, but I ain't gonna lie, the one time I saw them in concert, when they went into it, it was super cool. Neil Peart's drum part there is one of the most recognizable drum patterns. It's just a totally straight, and here's a good example of, Neil talks about that drum pattern in the beginning, how it sounds very simple, but he talks about how difficult that is to play that consistently with that feel at that tempo. And he goes, that's what we were sort of getting at. In the past, we would have had a lot of notes flying around, but now here's this very simple, it jumps right out at you as soon as the song starts. It sets the mood, it sets the feel of the song. It's a simple in concept drum part, but it's executed so well, only the way Neil Peart could. He was such a technician that it's an iconic drum part. The keyboards in this are super cool. I love the dee doo dee doo dee doo doo, like when the song's fading out and everything. Geddy sounds amazing on it. Those low keyboard notes, fantastic song.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a musician. To me, it sounds like a straight 4/4 time. He always said that it was the most difficult song for him to play live.
Yeah.
That's why it's
At the
always a
beginning it
challenge to
is.
play
It's a
live.
very just straightforward type drum beat, but it's done so precise. And because it's so iconic and so it has to be done perfectly like that, or the song isn't going to work. It's like the riff of the song in a lot of ways. It's the opening riff of the song.
Yeah, Tom Sawyer is definitely, like you said, because I'm a fan and because it became their biggest hit and because they played it every single show, I I call them the Suicide Five. There's about five Rush songs that I really never need to hear again. Tom Sawyer, Spirit of Radio, Closer to the Heart,
Yeah.
Time Stands Still, and Roll the Bones. Never again, please. But that's because every time I saw them, they pretty much played those and they're just played out to death. But it's an iconic song. It's their biggest hit. They still played it like football games and stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you hear it
It's their
everywhere.
biggest song, without question. If they ever wrote a hit, that's it.
Yeah, and it's one of these songs that transcends the band where I could
Exactly.
I could play this. My parents, I'm sure, don't know who did this song, but if I played this song for them, they would recognize it because, like you said, you hear it at hockey games, you hear it, just all over the place. It's one of those songs that's sort of transcended, what it is. It's in the lexicon of, the minds of the everybody. So, all right, next then is Red Barchetta. This is, I mentioned, Neil Peart in his lyrics, of one of my favorite lyricists, Neil Peart. Oh, also of note, in Tom Sawyer, as I was doing the research for this, I didn't realize this. I don't know, I'm not going to say the name correctly,
Pi
but
Dubois.
Pi Dubois, right?
Yeah,
He
the
was a
lyricist for
lyricist,
Max Webster.
right? And he was involved in the lyric writing on the song Tom Sawyer. So that's
Yeah, he
interesting.
had a different sketch of lyrics that Neil kind of took and took certain parts from it. So it was kind of like a collaboration. They also collaborated on Between Sun and Moon on Counterparts. But yeah, Neil really loved him. He was one of his favorite lyricists. They were big Max Webster
Yeah.
supporters. They used to take them out on tour.
Yeah, I know Max Webster's like a huge, huge band in Canada, so it makes sense. But Red Barchetta, this is like Neil Peart to me. His lyric writing, I love when he tells stories like the trees, and this is another example of it. It's just fantastic storytelling. The music is very goes along with the lyrics, like that part in the song, bam, 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 living and ding, ding. That whole part where they're doing those short choppy hits. It's just adrenaline surge. The song just sort of takes off, and the lyrics and the music goes right along with the lyrics. Very sort of cinematic.
Yeah,
In a
that's the word to
way.
use for this record and that song in particular. It's definitely a cinematic trip. The music and the lyrics are married perfectly. It's kind of like a condensed version. 2112, it took them 20 minutes to do it, whereas on
Yeah.
Red Barchetta, it takes them only about 7 to do it.
Yeah. All right, and then the instrumental YYZ, which is the Morse code for the Toronto airport, I
Yeah, and
believe.
apparently the dun 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 dun, that
Yeah,
beat that they're doing, that opening riff, apparently that's them playing YYZ in Morse code.
yeah,
They
right.
were
Oh my.
flying in once to Toronto Airport and they heard the Morse code coming over over the airwaves of the plane, and they were like, "That'd be a great riff to write a song to." That's kind of
Only
where they
Rush
got
can
the
pull something
inspiration.
like that off, and it
Yeah, I know.
totally
Only Rush
works.
would think of writing a song to the Morse code.
Right, and like I mentioned earlier, this is a great example of like everybody gets a chance to shine in this song. There's tons of playing in it, but it's very catchy. And you hear this on classic rock radio. You hear YYZ on classic rock radio, which is pretty crazy that a song like this, an instrumental like this, did, that it would get airplay like that. But it's great because, again, there's a lot of melody in it. I love Alex Lifeson's sort of Spanish sounding guitar solo in it. And Getty has all these cool bass fills. There's like a one part where Neil does to see his sort of, it's almost like a trademark thing for him, like this, where it sounds like he's rolling across all his drums. He's got like a million drums, and it's just a super cool song. And I remember I'm a bass player, and as a young kid, this was sort of like a landmark thing. Like I remember I learned how to play Phantom of the Opera by Iron Maiden, and that was like, oh wow, the kids at the school thought I was cool, and then some kid was like, oh yeah, let's see you play YYZ, and I had gotten it in a magazine, guitar magazine had the bass
Like a
part for it, and I
transcript.
remember just try. It's it's a really hard song to play, but really really cool and really catchy. So
Yeah, I love Geddy's playing on this whole record. It's got a great bass sound.
oh yeah, the bass
They
sounds just
captured him great on this
fantastic.
record. He has such
It's
a
so
nasty
punchy.
tone on this record.
It's growly and punchy, and it just has this sort of slightly distorted, but it's just real warm and thick, sound punchy, real super punchy bass sound. It's fantastic. All right, and then we've got maybe the other biggest hit off this record, Limelight. This is one that kind of like you mentioned Tom Sawyer earlier, I'm a little burnt out on this song, but it's got a great opening riff. Yeah, Alex Lifeson's opening guitar thing is iconic. Love the lyrics. Neil Peart sort of giving a little bit of himself away here with the classic line, "I can't pretend a stranger is a long-awaited friend." Again, these are lyrics that, although he's talking about himself, it was easy for people to relate to them. Great riffing, great playing. I love the guitar solo in this.
Yeah, it's my favorite solo Alex has ever done. I remember the first time I heard it, and even to this day, I love the elasticity and the
Yeah,
dive bombs, and it's so weird and cool. It's just so classic Alex Lifeson. I mean, he's written many classic riffs and solos, but it's always my favorite Rush song. It's the first song I ever heard. It's still my favorite. It's my favorite opening riff. It's my favorite solo. I love the roundhouse kneel at the end of it. I
yeah,
never get tired of that.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just it's the perfect Rush song. To me,
yeah,
there isn't 1 second wasted. It's just absolute
yeah,
perfection. Even though I'm a Rush fan and they've put out 19 records and I like them to varying degrees, people would probably call me a poser. I think the 2 best songs they ever wrote were Limelight and Subdivision. I think those are the most perfect Rush songs. There's a reason they're popular. There's a
yeah,
reason they got airplay because they're great and they're perfect.
yeah. And they're very, again, this is where Rush is able to really hone in on what they're trying to do. And like you said, it doesn't feel like there's any wasted moments on it. There's still great playing in this. There's still some odd meter things in it, and the riff is real quirky the way it sort of moves around. So there's great playing in it, but it's still super catchy. It's super melodic. You hear it on the radio all the time. Still, it's the lyrics are great in it, and again, it just works. I love the ending of it. The ending of it, it really has this sort of epic sound to it, the way when they're hitting those chords. So yeah, it's a
Yeah,
fantastic
Rush
song.
always had these awesome endings where they all get back to the drums, all
Yeah.
three of them, and they can just go end right on, right on a stop. They do it just visually.
Yeah.
And this Limelight is the perfect example of Rush's greatest endings, where they all gather, they're all riffing at the same time, and then on the drop of a dime, they just look at each other, lights go out, and you're just like, wow, the way
Yeah.
they could finish songs. Nobody could finish songs like that.
Yeah. All right, then side two. And side two always had a different feel to me. Maybe it's because all the hits are all on side one. Really, every song on side one has gotten, especially
Airplay.
Tom Sawyer and Limelight, are big radio airplay ones. You hear Red Barchetta and you hear YYZ on the radio. So all of side one has all these sort of hits on it. So side two is interesting. It feels like a deep cut side in some ways. Starts with Camera Eye, and probably my least favorite song on the record. And like I mentioned earlier, this is foreshadowing for me where Rush would start going after this point. There's a lot of keyboards in this one. It's not quite there isn't really a strong guitar riff in this one, not like you had in Limelight or the way YYZ was. It's still a cool song, and I do like what they were doing with keyboards and stuff like this. It's very textural. But for me, if I had to pick one that's a slightly weaker one on this record, it would be Camera Eye for me. What's your
Yeah, I think
thoughts
when
on
I
it?
was a kid, I liked this one the least because my introduction to Rush was Moving Pictures, so I didn't know that they had long songs. This was my first experience. The first side is pretty punchy. It's their perfect
Yeah.
album side. It's very FM friendly, as you said. It's very hooky, very catchy. And then when I heard this song, I remember, like you, as you say now, as a kid, I was like, I don't know if I like this one because it's like they're just doing the same song twice. They do a part and then they do another part, and it's just repeating what they
Yeah,
did earlier.
it doesn't jump out at you as much as the other ones do. Like you said, there just isn't that big sort of hook in it. So
For
next is
Rush,
with
for Rush fans, though, it was the last of the epics, so I think
yeah,
it has a soft spot for hardcore Rush fans because it was the last time they ever recorded a 10-minute track. After
yeah,
that, they never went back to the long songs again.
yeah. I didn't think of that. That's probably true. Next is Witch Hunt, and this is a cool one. It's got a little bit of a dark vibe to it. I like the sort of sound effects in the beginning. I like the way the guitar comes in. It's kind of moody and atmospheric in some ways. And this is where I think the keyboards do add to the sort of the atmosphere and feel of the song. And it's a cool one. I like it. It's maybe I could picture this if I was doing a Rush deep cuts. This might be one of them. I don't think they've played it very often live, if
Yeah,
ever,
no, it only
until
gets
they
played sporadically on tours, and
right.
this would be the cut if I'm going back to Moving Pictures, say today, 40 years on. That's my cut. That's the
Yeah,
deep cut. That's the one I love because I love how it's dark and it's heavy,
yeah,
and the lyrics still hold up today. They're still applicable today, and I
yeah,
just love Witch Hunt. To me, it's the deep cut on the record. It's a great song.
yeah. I agree. All right, and then Vital Signs. This one is the one that if they had stuck another song on side one, it could have been Vital Signs, because to me, this has got a real catchy chorus. I love sort of the bouncy rhythm. I love the like the intro thing. I love the way it changes feel. It goes into almost like sort of a fast reggae thing. A tired mind becomes a shapeshifter. That's just a really catchy line. Cool song. It's probably my favorite song on side two of the record. And I could see if there weren't so many other hits on this album, this could have been another one. Maybe if they had put this on side one, it would have gotten radio airplay. But
Yeah, they released it as a video, but they never released it as a single.
oh, really?
And it
I didn't
got
know that.
played
No.
on various tours. It definitely was their first attempt at reggae before they go completely
Yeah,
overboard on
before they
that.
get obsessed with the Police
Yeah,
and go on
right.
the
Then Signals and Grace, it's like Reggae City.
yeah.
But this is their very first, like you said, side two, and particularly that track kind of foreshadows where they're going to go.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Signals and Grace, they just go full bore into that style.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunately too. It's Alex Lifeson for me would get overshadowed by the keyboards as time went on. And this is kind of the last, he has moments on Subdivisions and he has one or two moments on Grace Under Pressure, but this is the last time where the guitar is dominant on more than 50% of the record, until they get to like
Counterparts, really.
counterparts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where
There's a huge void from like Signals all the way to Roll the Bones, where it just becomes very keyboard heavy, and
yeah,
Lifeson's always in the background.
yeah, at the expense of Alex Lifeson, which is a shame because, like you mentioned, he sometimes gets he's kind of an unsung hero in the band. A lot of the focus is on Geddy because he's the vocalist, is bass playing very upfront. Neil Peart as the lyricist and as one of the greatest drummers of all time. And sometimes people forget about Alex Lifeson, but like you mentioned earlier, he has a lot of great leads on here. He has a really kind of unique way of playing and putting his riffs and everything together and getting his voice. Even though they're a trio, they make a lot of sound. So but he finds a way to get his voice out in the band, at least up to this point. So, all right, well, there you go, Rush and their 1981 milestone moment, Moving Pictures. This would be the album that would just, blow them up you know, from this point on, they become, you know, everybody knows Rush from this. If you didn't know them before Moving Pictures, you knew of them after, you know, Moving Pictures is the album that really brings them out and puts them on the radio big time and everything. So all right, so let us know in the comments down below what you guys out there, what do you guys think of Rush Moving Pictures? What do you think of side 2 of this record? You know, is it kind of what me and C.Kay were talking about, the way it sort of foreshadows where they would go? And so let us know in the comments down below. C.Kay, thank you for joining me here at The Lair. I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation.
Thanks so much, John, for having me. I really love your show. So thanks for letting me stop by.
Thanks, man. It was great. All right. All right. Thanks again, everybody. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.